Hey everyone, I just wanted to start by saying a massive thank you to all of you who've picked up a copy of my first book, Hidden Haunts Scotland. Your support's been incredible, and I'm thrilled to hear how many of you have enjoyed diving into Scotland's lesser-known ghost stories. Now, I'm excited to announce my next project, Hidden Haunts England. In this book, I'll be exploring some of England's most overlooked and unreported ghost stories. Tales that have slipped through the cracks of history, but are just as eerie and captivating. If you've had your own strange or unexplained experiences in England, I'd love to hear from you. Drop me a message or leave a comment below, and who knows, your story might just end up in the next book. Now, to give you a sneak peek into Hidden Haunts England, today's episode dives into one of the spine-chilling stories featured in the new book. Let's journey into the heart of Lincolnshire, where strange occurrences and ghostly encounters have left locals haunted for generations. Market towns across England were the beating heart of the local economy, serving as bustling hubs where farmers, craftsmen, and merchants from surrounding rural communities would gather. These towns were more than just trading centres. They were vital to the social and economic life of the region, often granted official charters to hold regular markets. Such charters transformed market towns into thriving centres of commerce and interaction, where people could barter goods, share news, and build livelihoods. Market squares would come alive with activity, filled with the sounds of deals being struck, the clatter of horse-drawn carts, and the chatter of villagers catching up on the latest gossip. One such town was Epworth, situated in the Isle of Axholme. Epworth's market square would have been the focal point of the community, drawing traders from nearby villages and farms, eager to exchange agricultural goods like grain, livestock, and flax, for which the town was particularly well known. Before Dutch engineer Sir Cornelius Vermuyden's drainage project between 1627 and 1629, Epworth and the Isle of Axholme were part of an inland island surrounded by rivers, streams and bogs, and meres, which is a shallow lake. The isolation gave the isle a distinct identity, and its name reflects its former status as a waterlogged landscape. Once the marshes were drained and the fertile lands reclaimed, the town and its surroundings were transformed, with Epworth's market square at the heart of this thriving agricultural region. Epworth's significance wasn't limited to trade. Its location made it strategically important during the English Civil War from 1642 to 1651. While Epworth itself didn't witness direct battles, its proximity to key locations like Gainsborough placed it near the front lines of conflict. The Battle of Gainsborough in 1643 saw parliamentarian forces, led by Oliver Cromwell, defeat royalist troops in a pivotal moment for control over Lincolnshire. Though Epworth remained primarily a centre of trade, the movement of troops and the tension of war would have been deeply felt by its inhabitants, as both sides sought control of the region's valuable lands and roads. Epworth is perhaps most famous for its association with the Wesley family, particularly John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, and his brother Charles Wesley, a celebrated hymn writer. Their father, Samuel Wesley, served as the rector of Epworth from 1695 until his death in 1735. The Wesley family home, known as the Old Rectory, still stands today and is a museum dedicated to the life and work of John Wesley. John Wesley was born in Epworth in 1703, and his time in the town played a crucial role in shaping his religious views. He later became one of the leading figures of the 18th century evangelical revival, and the Methodist movement had a profound impact on religious life in Britain and beyond. The Wesley family faced hardships during their time in Epworth, both financially and socially. Samuel Wesley's unpopular religious views often made the family targets of local hostility, and they endured years of struggle. The old rectory in Epworth, built in the late 17th century after a devastating fire, was more than just a family home for the Wesleys. It was a symbol of Samuel Wesley's position as rector and a centre of religious life in the town. The Georgian-style building reflected stability and order, despite the financial difficulties the Wesley family faced. Samuel wrote sermons, studied scripture, and carried out his clerical duties here, while Susanna Wesley, a deeply religious woman, oversaw the education of their children, including John and Charles Wesley, shaping their intellectual and spiritual development. Beyond its role as a family home, the old rectory became a focal point for the local community, representing the church's authority in Epworth. Samuel Wesley's strong support for the Church of England, combined with his controversial politics and religious views, often put the family at odds with the local population. This led to financial hardship and social ostracism, turning the rectory into not only a place of learning and faith, but also a shelter from an often hostile outside world. Today, the old rectory stands as a museum, preserving the legacy of John Wesley and his role in founding Methodism. Visitors can explore the rooms where the Wesley children grew up, experience the spaces where sermons were written, and gain a deeper understanding of the challenges and inspirations that shaped one of the most influential religious movements in history. Once a place of both struggle and faith, the old rectory now stands as a testament to the enduring impact of the Wesley family. However, the Wesley family's tenure at Epworth is also remembered for an event that left a mark on Methodist lore: the haunting of the old rectory. Between 1716 and 1717, the Wesley family experienced a series of unexplained disturbances in their home, now famously known as the Epworth poltergeist, or the Wesley ghost. As with many hauntings, the Epworth poltergeist case started inconspicuously, with something that's happened to all of us: a simple knock at the door. A male servant heard the knock and approached to answer. As he drew close, he was startled by a low, eerie moaning, as if a man were leaning against the door, mortally wounded. The sound was faint but unmistakable, growing louder as he drew nearer. His heart quickened, but when he opened the door, the moaning ceased, and there was no one to be found. Perplexed, but assuming it to be local children playing pranks, he stepped outside, calling out a light-hearted warning for the mischief makers not to do it again. It wasn't until later that day, as he went about his duties, that something far more unsettling occurred. He thought he heard the soft grind of the corn mill, but when he turned to look, the mill was still and silent. Dismissing it as his imagination, he continued with his work, until the unmistakable sound began again, louder this time. Snapping his head back, he watched in shock as the hand mill turned by itself, grinding away with no visible cause. In that moment, he realized this was no simple prank. Something truly unnerving was at play. This was December 1716, the beginning of a 2-month-long poltergeist infestation at the old rectory. What began with a few knocks soon escalated into a nightly ordeal. At first, the Wesley family tried to dismiss the strange noises as natural causes or mischievous pranks. The knocks seemed random, moving from room to room, growing louder and more insistent. Susanna Wesley would hear them in the kitchen. Then moments later, they'd echo in the bedrooms. The family grew uneasy, but no one could explain the source of the sounds. By mid-December, the poltergeist activity became impossible to ignore. The knocks were no longer the only disturbance. Objects began moving of their own accord, as if carried by unseen hands. The furniture, once still, now seemed possessed by life. One night, the bed in which Emily Weasley lay shook violently. She tried to rationalise it, but the movement was unmistakable. Across the rectory, Other members of the family would find chairs overturned or doors mysteriously ajar. The activity soon followed a strange and unsettling pattern. Nearly every night at 9:45 p.m, it would begin with an eerie noise. A low, drawn-out creaking, like a saw winding up, as though the house itself was preparing for the disturbances. The energy seemed to gather strength with each passing moment, until the poltergeist's presence exploded into motion. The sound of heavy footsteps running up and down the stairs grew more frequent, as if someone were frantically pacing the house. Most unsettling of all was the sound of dancing and movement coming from the garret, the cramped attic space at the top of the house. The family knew the room was empty, yet the rhythmic thuds and shuffling echoed overhead as if something or someone was celebrating in the attic. The presence of these unseen visitors became a constant, chilling reality in their home. Even Samuel Wesley, the patriarch of the family and rector of Epworth, who'd initially dismissed the strange occurrences, began to acknowledge that something beyond reason was happening. Though he tried to remain calm and keep the family grounded, the unrelenting tension in the house mounted with each passing night. One evening in early January, as Susanna sat by the fire, she heard the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps echoing through the hallway. Each step was slow and deliberate, as though something was approaching with purpose. The rhythmic thud grew louder, as if whatever was coming was drawing nearer with each measured step. She turned towards the door, her breath catching as her imagination conjured a towering figure cloaked in shadow, its presence heavy with intent, its gaze locked on her as it slowly and deliberately approached. The footsteps crossed the room, pressing into the floorboards with unnatural weight, yet nothing appeared. Her heart raced, but she steeled herself, unwilling to show fear. Then just as suddenly as they had begun, the footsteps halted, leaving behind only an oppressive silence. The feeling of being watched lingered, a reminder that whatever haunted the rectory, though unseen, was always near. On several occasions, faint voices were heard throughout the house, as though distant whispers were threading through the walls. The sound rose and fell, too faint to be understood, but undeniably human. One night, as Martha Wesley lay in bed, she heard the low murmur of a voice drifting from the corner of the room. It was soft, almost like a secret being spoken just out of earshot. Her breath slowed as she strained to listen, but her heartbeat pounded so loudly in her ears it almost drowned out the sound. Still the voice persisted, slow and deliberate, like someone speaking just below her awareness. The words were lost in the shadows. A cold shiver crept over her, and the hairs on her arms stood on end. She felt trapped, frozen beneath the blankets, her body tense as fear gripped her. Even as the whispers faded, the sensation of being watched remained, leaving her trembling in the dark. The poltergeist, which the family affectionately named Old Geoffrey, seemed to grow bolder with time. One night, Emily again heard the footsteps in her room. But this time, the bed shook so violently she fled in terror. Her father Samuel tried to take control of the situation, even praying over the house, but the disturbances persisted. And when the family gathered for their evening prayers, the spirit became most agitated. It seemed to wait for certain words, as though triggered by their mention. The moment prayers were said for King George, the room would erupt with loud bangs and crashing, as though the walls themselves were shaking in protest. More unnerving was the reaction to the word Amen. As soon as the family uttered it, the spirit responded with violent knocks, its discontent echoing through the house. Yet, intriguingly, when prayers passed without mention of the king or amen, the house remained eerily still, as though the spirit was waiting in silence. The haunting took on more terrifying forms. The sound of glass bottles shattering was often heard on the stairs, as though someone had thrown them with force, yet no broken glass was ever found. The servant who had first experienced the poltergeist grew so concerned he began sleeping with the family mastiff in his room, hoping the huge dog's presence would bring comfort. On the first night, just before the disturbances began, the dog barked violently at the ceiling, as if sensing something above. But when the eerie noises started, knocks, footsteps, and strange shuffling, the dog cowered in the corner, whimpering after they ceased, too terrified to move. The poltergeist's escalating activity made it clear that no room in the house was safe from the oppressive force that now seemed to dominate their lives. As the days turned into weeks, the Wesley family could no longer ignore the overwhelming sense that they were being haunted by something far beyond their control. The entire household had witnessed the events: unexplained knocks, objects moving without reason, and constant feeling of being watched. Samuel Wesley's steadfast faith was tested, but he refused to let fear take hold of the household. Despite mounting evidence of the supernatural activity, he remained convinced that the disturbances were caused by something more mundane: rats. To prove his theory, he ordered a horn to be blasted through the house regularly, hoping the loud noise would drive away any vermin responsible. Yet the strange sounds persisted, and the horn proved powerless against whatever force had taken residence in their home. As if in retaliation for Samuel's defiance, the noises and banging intensified the next day, continuing relentlessly throughout daylight hours. Normally confined to the night, the poltergeist's activity now filled the daytime, its ominous thuds and crashes reverberating through every corner of the rectory. Samuel's skepticism only heightened the family's unease as old Geoffrey grew bolder, leaving them feeling increasingly helpless against the relentless haunting. One night, while in the nursery, Samuel heard the knocking again, and it seemed his patience had finally worn thin. According to John Wesley's account, he said sternly, "Thou deaf and dumb devil, why dost thou frighten these children that cannot answer for themselves? Come to me, to my study, that I am a man." Instantly it knocked his knock, the particular knock which he always used at the gate, as if it would shiver the board in pieces, and we heard nothing more that night. Till this time, my father had never heard the least disturbance in his study. But the next evening, as he attempted to go out into his study, of which none had the key but himself, when he opened the door, it was thrust back with such violence as had like to have him thrown down. Although the poltergeist never physically harmed anyone, its relentless presence disrupted the family's lives, shaking their peace and security. By late January 1717, as suddenly as it had begun, the disturbances ceased. The poltergeist seemed to have vanished, leaving behind a shaken but resilient family. Though the Wesley family never fully understood the source of the strange events, they remained convinced that something supernatural had taken place. It was John Wesley, the Wesley family's most famous son, who chronicled the haunting in great detail. At the time of the poltergeist, John was away at university, but the letters and stories from his family left a deep impression on him. He documented the events in his journals and later correspondences, viewing the poltergeist infestation as a profound spiritual trial. John would go on to become the founder of Methodism, a religious movement that reshaped Christianity in Britain and beyond. His documentation of the Epworth poltergeist remains one of the earliest and most detailed records of poltergeist activity, blending his deep faith with his belief in the supernatural. The Epworth poltergeist became part of both Wesley family lore and Methodist history, marking a peculiar chapter in their lives while serving as a reminder of the mysteries of the unseen world. Susanna Wesley endured more than her fair share of hardship. Of her 19 children, only 5 survived infancy, leaving her heart heavy with loss. The only year she was not pregnant was between 1701 and 1702, when her husband was forced to go into hiding due to his Jacobite sympathies. This year-long absence weighed heavily on Susanna, who was left to manage the household and care for her remaining children in a time of intense political and personal turmoil. Years later, as the strange disturbances plagued the Wesley home for 2 months, some have wondered if the source of the poltergeist activity could have been Susanna herself. The theory gains weight when one considers that the activity seemed to escalate whenever the family prayed for King George, the very monarch Samuel had opposed. His Jacobite allegiances, supporting the deposed Stuart monarchy, had already put Samuel at odds with King George I. This political tension, coupled with the emotional strain of Samuel's earlier flight, left Susanna to manage the household alone, and many believe that her suppressed resentment and frustration could have contributed to the eerie manifestations in Epworth Rectory. The spirit's violent reaction during prayers for King George and the mention of Amen may hint at Susanna's deeply repressed emotions, resentment for her husband's political entanglements, or anger at his absence during a particularly trying time. Could these suppressed feelings have manifested as the poltergeist that tormented the family? In parapsychology, a poltergeist agent is sometimes thought to be an individual whose unconscious emotional or psychological turmoil might influence the environment, leading to unexplained physical disturbances. The theory suggests that the poltergeist's activity wasn't an external force, but rather a physical manifestation of Susanna's inner turmoil. Her unspoken anger, grief and frustration may have found their voice in the violent knocks, crashes and eerie disturbances that shook the rectory. While we may never know the true cause of the Epworth poltergeist, the idea that Susanna's emotional state could have been at the heart of the activity offers a compelling explanation. After all, the most haunting disturbances are often not those of the spirit world, but the ones buried deep within ourselves. I included the story of the Epworth poltergeist in Hidden Haunts England because, much like other overshadowed hauntings, it holds a significant yet largely overlooked place in England's supernatural history. While cases like Borley Rectory have captivated the public's imagination with their dramatic tales of ghostly nuns and inexplicable phenomena, the haunting at Epworth, despite being one of the earliest and most well-documented cases of poltergeist activity, has largely faded from collective memory. Part of Borley's fame can be attributed to Harry Price, the famous and controversial paranormal investigator, whose promotion of the case through modern media helped elevate it to legendary status. In today's world, paranormal enthusiasts flock to notorious locations like 30 East Drive, drawn by its reputation for violent hauntings and marketable terror. Yet the quieter, more understated stories like the Wesley family's ordeal at the old rectory often hold just as much mystery and intrigue, if not more. The subtle dread and psychological weight of this case, grounded in history and faith, deserve to be remembered as part of England's rich tapestry of the unexplained, standing beside its more famous counterparts.